it was like I wanted to stop and say, don't you know what's going on? You know, and yet you couldn't do that. So it was like living in two worlds. I would get off that flight and fly domestic until they called me for another MAC trip. And when I finally flew MAC full time, that became a lot easier because I was just in that one world, except when I came home and, you know, your friends and family, nobody wanted to talk about it. And other flight attendants, they didn't want to talk to you about it either. They thought that what I was doing was wrong. So it was emotionally all the way through.
They're going to get on our plane and they're headed home. And I couldn't believe it. So when they started boarding, it was like high-five, just incredible. And we had a flight attendant who put different lyrics to the song, the Marine song. And it goes like this. With these wings up on my breast, we wish you peace and happiness. You fought for us both night and day. Now let's go home the American way. And they just broke up. Woo! And we're still on the ground at the gate. Doors closed. We taxi out. When we started rolling, another big cheer. When we lifted off, another one. They were home bound. And that was an exciting trip. Incredible, incredible trip.
When I say boys, we took boys over. But when on the trips home, we brought men back. And when they came on the flights, they didn't even know they were going home. They were all full of dirt and everything yet. And it was like, I don't know how they just pulled them out, you know, and they didn't realize. I mean, it was like one day they were fighting and the next day they're on an airplane going home. And a lot of them just, they kept saying, what am I doing here? What am I doing here?
Well, we weren't emotional in any way. We were doing our jobs and we were professional. But the men boarding the plane in Vietnam after their 13-month tour of duty, especially in Da Nang, we welcomed 365, this was when we had the DC stretch 8s, hot, sweaty, exhausted, mostly Marines onto our semi-air conditioned aircraft. And they were exhausted, almost dazed. And we did our best to get them seated and comfortable.
And yet when we were taking the boys, the men, back to the States, there were some of them that just wanted to talk. And we heard some awful things, and yet and so you would just sit there and you would just hold their hands and just let them talk, you know. There wasn't, what can you say in a lot of cases, but, and a lot of them told me they were afraid to land in the States because they had heard about the reaction and I've seen it for myself, you know, that they got. And so they just wanted to go somewhere and change into civvies so people didn't know they were military.
Did a lot of the people know that there were civilian airlines going in and out of there? I don't think so. I think if you were in the airline business, you did, because like I said, it was our charter airline and several other charter airlines, as well as Pan Am, Braniff, Continental. all going in and out of there. If you were in the airline business, you knew about it. If you had family, your family knew about it. But did the general public know about it as much? I don't think so. First of all, they were still angry about the war. But later on, when I would ever mention anything to people that I did that, they said, "Oh, were you in the military?" And I said, "No." I said, "I was a regular flight attendant." So no, I don't think the general public was aware of how many of us were going in and out of there and for how long.
It wasn't until the Gulf War that a lot of us were flying that, and we took the troops over, and the first couple of flights again we came back empty. And a bunch of us flight attendants who had flown, we were flight attendants then, who had flown MAC charters, we started talking about the difference in the two wars and how the troops were treated and what we were doing. And every last one of us, it was like all the emotions we had had for all those years just bubbled up, and we just cried and cried and cried.
After completing a week-long trip, I lived in Berkeley at the time, and I felt angry and frustrated and exhausted. I came home, as the troops did, to anti-war demonstrations and protest marches, and I could not participate. I had just brought plane loads of service people who had served our country, and I could not participate, and I felt angry. And some people seemed oblivious to the fact that we were even in Vietnam, and thousands of soldiers were going back and forth every day to Vietnam.
But years later, I was in Napa at a winery with a friend of mine, and wine tasting, and all of a sudden I heard my name. Someone was yelling my name, and I thought, what, I didn't know what was going on. I looked around, and all of a sudden this guy came running towards me. "Sandy, Sandy, I was on, you brought me home from Nam." And he came up and just gave me a big hug, and we just sat for a while and talked. But after flying the military trips, you saw what was really important in life. And I think that's carried through to this day. Whenever I go to any military events or like parades or anything like that, I cannot stop crying. It brings all this stuff back, and it's very emotional to me. And life isn't as free and happy as it used to be, and never will be, I don't think, again.